Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. Crisis of Faith, Episode 166.
Day 91, Ostenso region.
I would like to propose opening a prediction market on whether, if I get my own 30 useful idiots to train, I get farther than Asmodia on producing Ilani. To be judged by Sevar if she comes back, or Subirox if she doesn't.
Obvious things not being said aloud. That if Avaricia wins that contest, or if Sevar can be lured into judging it unfairly, the obvious next step will be to see whether Avaricia got further than Sevar in producing Ilani of a more Asmodian bent, as would naturally be judged by the Most High, who might tend to disagree with the Queen of Cheliax on the subject of whether Avaricia's Ilani were in fact more useful than the Ilani trained by the Queen's favorite. A disagreement like that, under these circumstances, would naturally tend to be resolved by giving Avaricia her own project section independent of Sevar. Mayayol has very little patience for the part where he first has to decide on this terribly reasonable-sounding appeal to merely open a prediction market, which act then seems to put him on Avaricia's side in having fired the opening spells of the battle, or alternatively makes him look unreasonable for denying such a small request, blah, blah, blah. Why can't he just fight demons? Don't bother with the prediction market, Avaricia. Just go ahead and try it. You write up the specs on the useful idiots, and Cheliax will see about getting you some. I've also been given to understand that our primary desideratum is producing more Asmodian Ilani, and if you feel up to that challenge, the Most High would be the natural one to judge the results, if you end up with any results worth presenting. Shall I just go ahead and set that all up directly? I'm quite certain that's what Sevar would tell me to do, you see.
Oh, I actually wrote up the specs earlier, in the course of writing up some thoughts on chemistry instruction. I'll pass them along now in that case. I commend your alacrity. She hands over a sheaf of papers.
Here's your already approved budget, Avaricia. I wish you exactly enough fortune to get your own project section not under myself or Sevar, and no more fortune than that.
Day 91, Osirian.
Keltham's first priority in investigating this library is going to be mind-reading magic, mind-controlling magic, mental disciplines or spells or magic items that defend against mind-reading, disciplines or spells or items that defend against mind-controlling. Also known side effects of using headbands. How do people actually check that their headbands aren't cursed? That sort of thing.
Headbands being cursed. Not really a thing. Of course, any magic item can be made to look like a different magic item, so you could make a headband that was a disguised necklace of strangulation or something, but there's no references in any of these books to subtle curses where the headbands alter your cognition slightly but undetectably, and it's not in anyone's threat model in fiction or non-fiction. Mind-reading magic. Detect thoughts. Second circle. A will save protects against it. There are magic items of it. They're not even that expensive, though they also wouldn't read anyone powerful who was trying not to be read. Mind-controlling magic. Oh boy, is there a horrifying variety. There's suggestion and triggered suggestion, which you don't remember until you hit the cue for it, and demand, which is sending with a concealed suggestion, and lesser geas for binding someone to obey your orders for days at a time, and geas, which works on more powerful people, and dominate person, which lets you puppet someone else at unlimited range as long as you're on the same plane as they are, and see through their eyes, and spells that cause permanent disorientation and the inability to reliably act on your intentions, and euphoric tranquility, which does what it sounds like, and overwhelming presence, which makes everyone who enters your presence prostrate themselves on the floor, convinced they're in the presence of a god. Baleful polymorph renders you permanently a mindless animal. There's memory modification. There's a reference to a ninth circle spell that turns you into a book of all of the thoughts you've ever had, and lets people read and edit them, though it's in a work of fiction and it's not clear if the spell is a real thing or not. The best protection against mind control, outside an artifact helmet like the Crown of Infernal Majesty, is the spell Mind Blank, which is 8th circle, so good luck if you're not an 8th circle caster and don't have one to make you scrolls or cast it for you. Protection from evil helps against mind control from evil creatures and casters. Enchantment foil helps in general, as does spell immunity. Non-detection, which also comes in an amulet, is useful against divinations unless the person casting them is very powerful. A lot of adventurers, at least in these works of historical fiction, seem to deliberately pass through an anti-magic area routinely just so they can notice if any spells fucking with them are active, though that won't detect past memory modification and requires there being one around. Some wizarding academies have them for research reasons, and there's apparently several hundred square miles of wasteland where magic doesn't work as a consequence of an ancient war.
No such thing as cursed headbands, according to this layer of reality. Lovely. That amulet sounds like a priority, yes. Any such thing as items for protection from evil? Also, does anybody know whether protection from law on top of that would interfere with the Abadar link?
It shouldn't. Gods aren't really affected by mortals throwing on lots of mortal protective magic. There aren't items of protection from evil or protection from law, though it's possible if they post a request, some wizard who has figured out how to do it will reveal themselves. He also might just want spell resistance, which protects against any magic being cast on him that he'd rather wasn't. There are items for that, though they're very, very expensive. They can get him an amulet of proof against detection and location. He's also unscribable inside the dome. Magic generally doesn't work across the dome.
When Iomade drops a vision on him, does she just get all the contents of his mind? Does Abadar get all the contents of his mind every morning when Keltham prays? People here may take it for granted, but Keltham comes from a world where people are used to more mental privacy than that.
Gods do not learn everything their clerics know when their clerics pray to them, though it's unclear if this is impossible or just outlandishly expensive. Visions like the one he got are very rare, but probably Iomade could have in fact learned the contents of his mind when she was doing that. The person pointing him around the library volunteers that Abadar would presumably have told her not to do that, even if she doesn't not do that for good reasons, which she probably does, but he would want to ask a representative of her church about that.
Sounds like, say, Urgathoa can decide to drop a vision on Keltham, read his mind, and there's nothing anybody can do about that. Or Asmodeus. Is he wrong?
Abadar might be able to stop them doing that, but there sure is not mortal magic that could stop that, yeah. The vision part might not even be necessary.
Cheliax at one point claimed to Keltham, apparently with snack service involvement, though that would be easy enough to fake, that Rovagug cultists were coming to kidnap him and would have the info to make it to his bedroom. Malyal, a 5th Circle priest of Asmodeus, supposedly that is, said that Rovagug wasn't party to non-interference agreements. How smart is Rovagug? Is it known to suddenly mind control people?
Not very smart, and yes, but only when they lived in the scar created in the world by its imprisonment.
There is a puzzle here that Keltham doesn't get, about why Rovagug released cultists still exist. If even the existence of Rovagug cultists is known true, never mind that particular case. Presumably, nearly all gods are opposed to Rovagug cultists, and ought to be able to coordinate on some sort of exception on their usual non-intervention rules to squish Rovagug cultists, and gods can read minds.
Gods can't meaningfully read minds. Keltham is such a deeply unusual case that it's conceivable a god would burn the astonishing amount of resources and share of permitted intervention required to read his mind and make sense of what they found. But that's not like a feature of the world that can be extrapolated to any case that occurs more than once in 1,000 years.
Detect Thoughts is a 2-inch circle wizard spell. Snack service seemed to practically be reading everybody's mind all the time. And isn't Nethys supposed to know everything? Why don't the other gods just pay Nethys for the information? You know, never mind. New library investigation topic. How did Nethys, Irori, and Ericura become gods?
Nethys, the books actually disagree on whether he was mortal. If so, whether he was one singular mortal or whether he's rather understood as the end state of a process many mortals have undergone, and whether he actually counts properly as a god. If he was mortal, he probably became a god through doing a magic ritual, which made him able to see everything in the universe, which simultaneously made him divine and fragmented him into trillions of pieces and drove him mad. Or maybe he broke into trillions of pieces and then some tiny fraction of them ascended. Or maybe he just saw into another plane where he was already a god and let that god possess him, but the process drove him mad. Or maybe, whenever someone seeks omniscience, they are added to Nethys, and that's why he's mad. Hard to say, really. He definitely is attested to have backed the first pharaoh of Osirian in defeating Ulumat, maybe while still mortal, if he was mortal, or maybe while as a god. In one version of the story, he ascended from the defeat of Ulumat. He also tried backing the Naga pharaoh and immediately drove her permanently and irrevocably insane. After she burned all his temples, and in some accounts all his worshippers. He was more hands-off with the visions. Irori pursued mental and physical perfection. Gods were more perfect than mortals, so in the course of becoming more perfect he became a god. Erikera stole the secret of divinity from Pharasma, who punished her by sending her to hell. Or maybe Erikera literally was the secret of divinity, which grew a will of its own. Or maybe Erikera just realized the secret of divinity in one of her visions and then could not be separated from it, and took it with her into hell, seeking hell's protection from Pharasma. Or maybe Erikera foresaw that the secret of divinity would be needed in hell, and took it there, defying Pharasma. Or maybe Erikera is Pharasma's aspect of defiance and hubris, now acting independently from the rest of Pharasma somehow. Or maybe Erikera is Pharasma's daughter after Atropos. Or maybe Erikera is just a devil who made all that stuff up to make herself more mysterious.
Golarion has theories about reality, like fans have theories about fiction. Let's zoom in on that Irori business. That monk of Irori said some things suggestive that there is yet another god meddling in Keltham's affairs for some reason. How'd he do it? Did he leave a step-by-step guide? Has anybody else done it?
He was a high-level monk. He did not leave a step-by-step guide. Over time, powerful monks become meaningfully less like mortals, their bodies less able to affect the state of their minds. Maybe if you take that process far enough, you become something more like a god. His followers have sought to follow in his footsteps, but none have yet succeeded.
Okay, maybe in Golarion it's like totally normal for somebody to do something, and then nobody else can do the thing for the next. This book doesn't even say how long, except that it's been at least 2,000 years. But in civilization, that's not normal. Keltham can't help but find it a bit suspicious when combined with the whole Starstone business. Are there by any chance stories about very advanced Irori monks suddenly vanishing and not showing up in the afterlife?
There are a couple references to some who attain enlightenment and then leave to wander the universe and are never seen again.
Yes, this again reminds him. Didn't Carissa say something about Eridan searching the universe for thousands of years and not finding anything? What does the library think is out there?
There are definitely a lot of worlds out there with people on them. No one knows what Eridan was looking for, but it's generally agreed he didn't find it.
Humans? Non-humans? Do they know how to mine spell silver cheaply? Is there any trade going on here?
This library does not answer the question of what Eridan found when he spent thousands of years searching. There is not any trade going on here.
That's really bizarre, library. Even if interplanetary teleport is ninth circle, you'd think there'd be like people occasionally taking 100 pounds of spell silver in one direction and coming back with 100 pounds of diamonds because they're relatively cheaper or more expensive on planets. Keltham has figure out what diamonds are on his menu, but he's expecting it to be complicated and has been previously focusing on spell silver.
Osirians think it'd be incredibly cool to trade with other planets, if you could figure out which ones would trade with you. You cannot just go a habitable planet around that there star to target an interplanetary teleport.
But if the aliens on other planets or other planes aren't showing up to Golarion to help, then their planets are all disaster areas of their own. And if the desolation is that uniform, it's probably maintained by divine mandate in the places prophecy still holds, every plane except this plane, or every planet except Golarion. The scope of prophecy shattering isn't clear, or the aliens, if they're more advanced, aren't a kind of thing that cares about the mortals on Golarion. Or the gods are preventing them from helping Anybody seeing a flaw in that reasoning?
Desolation seems like a very strong word for Golarion, which is a pretty nice place to live. If everywhere in the multiverse were like Golarion, that'd be really good news. It does seem that the aliens do not have easy interplanetary transport themselves, or else don't want to trade with Golarion, or else can't.
Possibly due to lack of prior literature analyzing the Great Silence. The Osirians do not seem to have grasped the concerning aspect of the reasoning. Well, this here planet of Golarion looks possible to fix, though, if we did fix it, the obvious next course of action for Golarian civilization would be to launch trade and rescue missions to all these other planets and hypothetical other planes, none of whom are already here with trade or rescue missions for some reason. Speaking of planet-destroying threats, does the library have any more info about Rovagug? What it is, where it came from, why people think the world will be destroyed if it gets out of the dead vault, that supposed prophecy about Asmodeus letting it out? What international agreements are in place to stop Rovagug cultists, like the ones who supposedly went after Keltham? Why the cult hasn't just been stamped out already?
According to the Windsong Testaments, just after the current incarnation of reality came into being, Pharasma took her first step off the seal in fear of something chewing and gnawing beyond her perception. Her next steps led to the birth of the first deities, and one of the new gods stepped forth beyond Pharasma's first fearful step, and in so doing would be transformed and absorbed by that fear. None can remember whether that fear became Rovagug or was Rovagug in the first place. In the earliest days of creation, Rovagug was tasked with burrowing through the abyss. As mortal life began, Rovagug gnawed his way out of the deepest abyss and jumped across the astral plane to invade the material plane. He consumed 7 worlds, but as they had no names nor histories, their taste was dull, and he only put up a token fight when the other gods drove him back to the abyss. After Asmodeus killed Aegis, Rovagug sneaked into the material plane again and fed on the world where the murder took place. As its inhabitants died in agony, Rovagug reveled in the taste, and he proceeded to destroy countless worlds. During this period, he rampaged through Axis in the greatest calamity that ever befell the Eternal City, laying waste to many districts which have never recovered to this day. Sarenrae decided that Rovagug would have to be defeated, and gathered under her banner an unlikely collection of gods: Abadar, Apsu, Asmodeus, Calistria, Dahak, Desna, Dubral, Aristeel, Gazra, Pharasma, and Torag, along with a number of other gods from more remote parts of the world. Many gods died in this battle, but their names have been forgotten. Certainly the gods who sided with the rough beast will never be remembered. Calistria lured Rovagug to Golarion, and distracted him while Torag and Gorum forged the shell of the dead vault, and Pharasma imbued it with potent wards against escape. Sarenrae then sliced open a rift in the windswept wastes on Casmaron on Golarion's surface, sending Rovagug stumbling into the dead vault. Dubral impaled him with the star towers that prevented him from hearing prayers, and the archdevil Asmodeus bound him with a key crafted by Abadar that only the Prince of Darkness could turn. Sarenrae then repaired the rift, leaving behind a smooth scar, and instructed her followers to avoid it. Rovagug's defeat marked the end of the Age of Creation. According to the Concordance of Rivals, when the end times come, Rovagug will be freed by a desperate Asmodeus in the hope that he will consume the other apocalypse. Indeed, Rovagug will devour the rest of creation before consuming himself, leaving behind only Grotus to turn off the light of the cosmos and a survivor to rebuild it anew. Rovagug's cult is illegal almost everywhere. However, sometimes some people will independently decide that the universe should be destroyed, and will tend to become cultists of Rovagug. No matter how frequently or harshly a society stamps them out, some new ones will tend to show up. To some tiny insane fragment of Golarion's populace, the universe should be eaten is apparently a popular stance. Also, some countries refuse on principle to make any religions illegal. Sometimes this is used as a pretense for their neighbors to invade, but it's not so much more powerful than other excuses to invade that the countries that do it have been wiped out already. No one knows what exactly would happen if Rovagug were freed. The best-case scenario is probably that the gods are able to re-imprison him at the cost of merely the destruction of one or two of Galarian's continents and everyone on them. More horrifying scenarios involve Rovagug getting into Axis again, or just succeeding at not being re-imprisoned at all and running off to eat lots more worlds.
Keltham will turn his attention to real, on this layer of reality, geopolitics, trying to figure out the landscape of countries who ought to hear his lectures or go in on a counter-Cheliax alliance to actually build civilization. And then to magic, browsing books of spells to see if he can spot any obvious ones that Cheliax decided not to tell him about. Does this library have books of standard commercially available magic items with prices, like a catalog or something?
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of spells Cheliax decided not to tell him about.
Amulet of Proof Against Location and Detection, 35000GP, contains a warning that amounts to basically does not work for crap against powerful casters. Mantle of Spell Resistance, 90000GP or so, if you can find somebody to make you one. Special Commission. It's funny how prices that would have once made Keltham want to run screaming into the night make so much less of a difference, once he's not sure the money is real. It seems like computer game money now. Okay, his brain is full. Enough library. Keltham needs to find out if they located Ione Sala and were able to get starting info from her, or if he's on the critical path delaying everything. He needs to find out how much time it takes to learn to cast wizard spells in here, because he feels naked without prestidigitation. He feels like he needs to put the Splendor headband back on, and he's going to ignore that part.
They located Ione Sala. She is willing to sell them what she knows, and he should take as much time to rest and reorient and learn about Osirian as he'd like. Everyone is very concerned about him, and the general advice for someone in something resembling his reference class would be to go spend a lot of time at a monastery or something, not trying to transform the world. It doesn't take that long to learn how to cast cantrips in here. They can get him a tutor this afternoon if he'd like.
Most people in his reference class may not be called upon to wipe out a large circular area of Cheliax at any random time in the next week. He'll take the tutor, please. How long does it take to learn to cast from third circle wizard scrolls in here?
Depends a lot on the person, but if he makes it a priority and has the best tutor they can get him, he does. He should have it down in less than a week. Osirian strongly expects that the actual worst-case scenario here is that they teleport someone into Cheliax with a peace treaty they wrote up before Keltham arrived, and tell the Queen she can sign in the next 5 minutes or the country is destroyed, and then she signs. Obviously, they can't send that person if the Pharaoh doesn't actually prefer destroying Cheliax to taking other available actions here, or if Keltham would help with the threat but not the follow-through. But he does, and Keltham would too under the relevant circumstances, and Cheliax will know it. So Cheliax is almost certainly not going to actually get exploded.
Yes. A logic which relies entirely on Keltham ignoring that logic and being ready to actually destroy Cheliax, because Keltham is lawful, presumably the Pharaoh is lawful, and obviously there are going to be truth spells involved. No? So Keltham is indeed ignoring that logic, and proceeding as if he may need to destroy Cheliax at any random time in the next week, and not relying on Cheliax offering to do anything else which is not that, since, if Keltham relies on that offer, and ends up not prepared to destroy Cheliax, Cheliax will not so offer. Keltham will go try to learn to cast cantrips within the Black Dome then.
It's sort of like learning how to retie your shoes if all your muscle memory got erased. It's kind of annoying, but the tutor is in fact very good, and has a very detailed and precise set of exercises for getting used to the different way that magic moves.
Keltham will at one point think of Carissa tutoring him in spellcraft, send the tutor out, have a sobbing fit for about 5 minutes, wipe off his face, invite the tutor back in, and resume studying. Not being able to use prestidigitation is very inconvenient, including when you need to clean up your face or your clothes have gotten sweaty.
He has it down, though inconsistently, after a couple of hours. The tutor says he's a quick study and apologizes for the inconvenience of the dome.
Weird thing to apologize for if you're not the first pharaoh, or possibly Nethys. But prestidigitation that works half the time is good enough, so long as he's not fumbling the catch of the cantrip. He forgot to eat lunch. Oh, Keltham is probably going to want a ring of sustenance at some point, and that takes a week to kick, so he should probably put one on soon. What does he need to learn in the way of etiquette to meet Merenri and Ismat? The note did say specifically breakfast, but Keltham wouldn't be surprised if they'd also do dinner, or afternoon snacks, or actually, never mind, his brain just screamed at him. He should not actually try to meet with Merenri or Ismat or study etiquette today. He'll next review the note about intellectual property that Osirian copied from Cheliax. Does it look urgent? What's up with that?
Abadar has been copying Osirian all contracts and all prediction markets related to Project Lawful. Most of the time, these didn't have intellectual property concerns. But there were a couple of prediction markets on which of several spell silver approaches would pan out fastest. Osirion has no qualms about espionage against Cheliax, because Cheliax would do it to them. But they don't want to have stolen anything from Keltham, and are happy to pay him whatever seems fair. They were not able to make spell silver cheaply off just this information by itself anyway. They didn't have enough detail on the prestidigitation technique.
Not urgent, then. It wraps into whatever else Ione Sala can give them. Who else has bid on his time? Keltham is too tired to read, and doesn't want to be alone with his thoughts.
New request since this morning. A different prince has bid 6,000 gold to be taught baseline immediately.
By casting share language, baseline, from scroll outside of the dome. 6,000 GP is enough play money to still get Keltham's attention. He could buy some useful things with that and own them, but not if this is a bid on literally being taught the whole language over the course of months.
Oh, he thinks it'll take him about 3 days, maybe 2.
Keltham's not seeing it. But 3 days is a lot of Keltham's time, even at the 6,000 GP level. What's this Feanor guy's bid on Keltham spending an hour sketching the technical basics of baseline, and then Keltham can cast share language from a scroll to be provided him, outside the dome because otherwise Keltham can't cast that high, up to 6 times over the next few days, on somebody else who can teach Feanor all the particular words, etc. Also, Keltham has not had time to learn any etiquette, and might need some sort of legal release form or whatever saying he's allowed to not know it.
1,000 GP for the diminished version. Keltham can get an etiquette waiver.
Not as attractive, obviously, but it requires less brain power than a lot of things, so sure.
Prince Feanor Lintamande. The same offer goes for any other languages spoken on your planet of origin, obviously, and for dialects, if you know any, and I'll also pay for literature or poetry, if you remember any, or brought any with you, or think you can coax Abadar to give it to you out of the vault on the grounds it's just returning something you already had. Why is it called baseline?
It's the language everybody can be assumed to speak, as a baseline on which to build other ideas and concepts. For example, all the phonemes are a minimum distance away from each other that guarantees people with slightly less acute hearing can understand it when spoken under slightly adverse conditions. In between phonemes that are possible to pronounce, but potentially difficult to hear correctly, are then reserved for constructing conlangs, constructed languages, many of which use baseline as a baseline but add new short words using the expanded phoneme set. The only one of those I know is default conlang, which has a lot of subtle in-between syllables, so that children will hopefully grow up to be able to distinguish conlangs. You can teach your child a different conlang, but it ought to be conlang phoneme complete.
Huh. Is the idea that it's free law if you've got everyone teaching their child languages with phoneme differentiation in mind? That's brilliant. Now I'm annoyed my children are all grown. Maybe I'll do it to the grandchildren. How did you get the language to that state? I assume it didn't start that way. Did you do a bunch of deliberate consonant shifts?
No law, chaos, judgment built into the universe. No magic. No afterlives, just the equivalent of turning people into statues until we can heal them later. People just do it so their kids can learn conlangs when they grow up. I assume our language got synthesized de novo, but for unknown reasons. Civilization sealed off all its history, so I don't know the story of that. It's held in fictionalized standard Fanon history that there was a huge fight between all the conlang fanatics in the world over how to design it. But compared to Taldane, the difference is very stark. It's very obvious that baseline was designed, and Taldane just happened. For example, grammatical baseline, not all conlangs, always has exactly one legitimate parsing. There's no homonyms, no cases of two meanings with the same sound. If you stick to a subset used for emergencies and basic social interactions, there's no two sentences that sound the same, even if you run all the phonemes together and eliminate spaces. The most common words are short, and long words are used more rarely. All digits are single syllables that sound completely unlike each other and are written using very clearly distinguishable strokes. That sort of thing. Taldane would reduce most of our people who care about language properties to frothing, incoherent horror and madness.
No, they'd love it if your world only has constructed languages. It'd be like a palace-raised child seeing their first tree. Language as a carefully optimized spell form is beautiful. Language as a thing that grows anywhere, among everyone, men and orcs and demons and angels and deep-sea creatures, is also beautiful. In Taldane, scientific words tend to have sibilants because we borrow them from Nex, which, like most of the fringes of the Kelishite Empire, speak Kelish inflected with their own native tongues. Our shortest words are for things that have been around for a very, very long time. Pig, bread, cow, king, tree, sky. There's a whole history written there, what things people needed words for first. Potatoes are a long word in Taldane and in Osirian because they're a new food, introduced from Arcadia about 120 years ago. In Narragansett, spoken in Arcadia, it's Nuna because it's a staple. I'm not saying that you shouldn't optimize a language. You should, and it's beautiful, and I want you to teach me it immediately. But your people who care about language properties wouldn't be horrified to see a thing growing in the wild they've only ever built in a lab.
We've got lab-grown versions of those too. The fictional non-synthetic language used by a common alien species in our stories has an imaginary history extending over 60,000 years that was built by thousands of conlang designers working in parallel to extrapolate a reasonable history, and then turned into a real language when some children were raised to speak that as well as baseline. I don't speak very much of it, but I can say, yo, let's equalize a set prisses. We come with intent to peacefully trade everything worth trading. Or, take us to your keepers. Bring us to your most lawful people who can bargain with true oaths. Those aliens were expensive to create, but so many authors use them that the license is now practically free. But their language doesn't have homonyms, because that's just crazy, like, nobody thought aliens would put up with that.
Yes, that seems like exactly the kind of mistake that clever people trying to invent a language that evolved without seeing any languages that evolved would make, obvious from our side, but not from theirs. Sitting in the palace trying to extrapolate trees won't get you anything even remotely resembling a tree, though I'm sure it gets you something fascinating in its own right, and I'll pay you for that too. You might think with thousands of people, someone would notice that alien language ought to be crazy. And if it doesn't have 24 features that seem crazy, you did it wrong. But it's so easy, when you've grown up with the world all around you, to underestimate how much creativity would be required to invent it. I'm sure they were doing their best, and I don't expect I could have done it well either. Well, today I easily could, but not if I'd grown up in your world. I actually wonder what share of the obvious errors are a consequence of the difficulty of extrapolating history versus a consequence of the difficulty of extrapolating linguistics specifically. How long has it been since your rulers banned your history? Did they permit notes on the relative frequency of wars and migration and epidemics and transitions in staple crops and durations of rule? Did they ban that as well?
Screened off the entire thing. Nobody except a handful of people at one pole of the world have any idea now what was happening some unknown number of decades ago. All the old cities were put into long-term storage. Nobody can look at any old books. I expect more people than a handful know why we had to do that, but I don't. We're told that a false analogy is getting a pessimized message from aliens with unshattered prophecy that was allowed to spread in an untracked way, resulting in everything needing to be causally screened off, but that this is not what actually happened. Anyways, you want Baseline's type system or what?
Wow, that must have involved killing more people than Aradan's death managed. I disapprove, obviously, but on some level, I'm impressed your rulers had the capabilities to carry out a crime on that scale. Yes, I do want Baseline's type system.
I'd be surprised if the number of casualties was greater than like a dozen people who fell off a ladder while mothballing a city, but I had this conversation in Cheliax, and don't want to repeat it here, so... Baseline. All of the rules are known to Keltham explicitly. They have 0 exceptions. No word is both a noun and a verb. You can infer the syntax tree in a single forwards pass. Words agglomerate using explicit agglomeration markers. Anything beyond 2 levels of recursion gets handled by explicit matched parentheses. If you can learn an actual human language in 3 days, you can probably learn the basics of this in an hour. The writing system is designed to be displayed using a small set of LED lines, or alternatively to be writable in quick handscript, or alternatively to be readable in fine calligraphy, full of sweeping curlicues that look like something Fëanor might invent just to be pretty, all using the same underlying shapes.
Thankfully for everyone involved, he is too distracted by learning all Baseline's grammatical rules and asking questions about the design constraints that motivated them to get into an argument about how many people die when their rulers tell them to evacuate their cities and farms for secret reasons, or in the ensuing civil wars. It doesn't even take him an hour. He does not need things explained twice.
Keltham will have time to chant Baseline's central cheating poetry then, where the central cheating poetry of an ahistorical/synthetic style conlang is the stuff that rhymes and scans because you built the language to make it do that. It's often how conlang designers fill in final details after all the syntactic constraints and other purposes are laid down. Baseline's central cheating poetry is mostly homilies of rationality that civilization wanted people to be able to keep in mind even under moments of stress, plus some other proverbs they deemed central to themselves. Your strength in the way is your ability to be more confused by fiction than by reality. I notice I am confused, therefore something I believe is fiction. You can move faster if you're not afraid of speed. Anyone can kill anyone, but they probably shouldn't. In life's name and for life's sake. There's important central cheating poetry about accepting reality and accepting costs already sunk and losses already accrued. Keltham will say those later. Sorry.
He listens intently and immediately starts remixing them. You can move faster if you're more confused by fiction than by reality. Your strength in the way is you can move faster. I notice I am confused. Anyone can kill anyone. Therefore, something I believe is fiction.
Full points on syntax, semantics not so much. It's a less impressive feat when Fëanor is doing it in a language that actually has a type system, you know?
He's still confused by the claim anyone can kill anyone, but if Keltham is unwilling to explain it, he'll just have to wait for the person with share baseline to try.
Okay, so Fëanor is now speaking to Keltham exclusively in well-formed baseline, has mastered all the phonemes, only needs to be told any word once, and can be told whole translated sentences and infer back the words. This is probably impressive, and not just because baseline was designed to be easier to learn than Taldane. Keltham doesn't have any reference points here, except that if Carissa could do this, she probably would have. However, if Fëanor wants to pass as a native baseline speaker to Keltham, he's going to need to learn some mental distinctions that influence voice tones, now that Keltham thinks about it. Some aspects of pitch and baseline aren't controlled by language design. They're allegedly free emotional expressions that have nonetheless settled into informal troughs. The way that Fëanor is doing the rest of this perfectly makes it stand out. That Fëanor, for example, sometimes uses an implicit tone of voice that sounds like he's instructing reality what to do as if it were a person, or pronouncing a conjecture like it's a flat statement of fact, or saying an ought statement at a pitch that makes it sound like an is statement. You can do that to make metaphorical points, but Fëanor seems to not be doing it on purpose. Keltham apologizes for not being able to state explicit generative rules here. He can just tell that some inflections sound wrong, state why they sound wrong, and say the sentence over again the way a Dath Ilani would.
Yes, that's how learning a language always is. You can't actually make all human behavior explicit, even if you have put lots more effort into trying than anyone else. He is delighted to pick it up the slow way. But seriously, he wants to know once he has a bit more baseline fluency, Why is there poetry making the claim that anyone can kill anyone?
No economic magic, no conceptual magical medicine, no alternate physics saying important people are mysteriously harder to injure. Dead people with uninjured brains can be stored indefinitely, but not brought back right away by civilization's current capabilities, and everybody is way too creative. Like there's probably some people who can't kill some people. A 3-year-old is going to have a hard time taking out the chief executive of civilization. That's why it's spoken with the, "This statement is literally false," but in a way where it's mostly true, and the exceptions are important. Inflection, rather than the overt trolling inflection, which would sound like, anyone can kill anyone, but they probably shouldn't.
Surprise, dubious, questioning. It'd be hard to have government if most people could kill most other people.
Okay, so it's not just Cheliax that thinks that. It's hard to have terrible governments if a majority of people can outfight any minority that tries to tyrannize them. All Golarian governments are terrible, and would thus not last for upwards of 30 seconds in Dathilan. Inference rather than observation, submitted for further challenge. If you can't read off these inflections, or infer them from obvious to a Dathilani context, you might think that Keltham was a lot more confident of what he was saying than he'd sound like to someone in civilization.
Causing everyone to leave their farms and cities can only be done with a governance that can outfight its population better than Cheliax can. Confident, submitted for argument.
Too many simultaneous replies. Please hold while I order them. Humorous. 1. It can't be done that way even if governance can outfight its population. That would be a negative consequence, presented only in anticipation of the other's output change, threat, which people would ignore because they don't want their predictable decision to offer a reason to threaten them. Unobserved, confident. 2. One of the few facts passed down is that when it was said this must be done, all of governance quit and was never allowed in governance again, to show that they took it seriously and didn't expect to benefit themselves. Reported, confident. 3. I'm much more of a cognitively diverse nonconformist rebel than the average Dathilani, and it's never occurred to me that I ought to go trespass in an old city that somebody presumably had a very good reason for hiding. Direct observation. 4. Farms are huge mechanical operations operated by one person in 100. They would just change out the machinery once it had been redesigned, not give up the farmland. Effective certainty.
One of the facts in your banned history books is that people do not actually ignore threats. That is not how people work. Unobserved, confident. Some people would bravely ignore the threat, and then they would be executed in front of everyone else, and the government would go on down the line until they ran into some people who had realized about themselves that they did not actually ignore threats. Unobserved, confident. Your government can just lie to you about whether all of governance quit or not, if all the books and records from the time are banned. Effective certainty. It is possible that instead of mass executions, Dathilan did mass suggestions which produced an entire population that would not go look at cities, so long as someone told them someone had a very good reason for hiding this city. But that is not a result that can be achieved without powerful mind control or mass executions. Unobserved, confident. If we go ask 100 lawful people in Osirian, at least 20 of them would go try to dig up an old city if this would not be punished severely. Effective certainty.
I'm not getting it. People did a really huge amount of work and spent a lot of money to preserve those cities. They had some very strong reason I don't know. Why would I wreck all their hard work and probably endanger everybody on my planet? Inflections of puzzlement are much the same in Baseline as in Taldane.
To find out what's there.
A bunch of old cities? I'd understand if you were curious about why we had to do that, but what's inside the cities is just going to be like people's old tableware. And museums with all of our lost art and history from the last 1,000 years or whatever, I guess. I'd go look if that were costless, but it's not costless.
I would go to learn their languages myself. My wife would go to see their art. My son Masaharta would go to hear their music. My son Merenre would go to learn how economics was invented and whether the path we are on is the best one or just the one we ended up at by chance. My son Telkar would go because the government told him not to.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.